Residential Sales Comparison and Income Approaches, Hondro's book, page 204. Appraising partial interest and special ownership. When the subject of an appraisal assignment involves a partial interest or a special ownership arrangement, the assignment is usually considered complex, especially for most residential appraisers. In both cases, the interest being appraised is something less than fee simple. There are many examples of a partial interest. In this portion of the chapter, we will review some of the more common situations relevant to residential appraisers. Leasehold and leased fee interests. There are various reasons why an appraisal of the leasehold or leased fee interest or the leasehold or leased fee estate may need to be appraised. In some cases, the scope of the assignment may include only valuing this interest. One example might be when the lease is to be sold and assigned to another party. Another example might be when the new owner of a property, which is leased at below market level, desires to buy out the remaining term of the lease from the existing lessee. There are several methods by which to value the leasehold and leased fee interests of a particular property. Most of these methods are income techniques. For residential properties, the simplest and most common method of developing a value opinion for the leasehold or leased fee interest is the gross rent multiplier technique. The sales comparison approach is of little value unless comparable sales of similar leasehold or leased fee interests can be located. The concept of leasehold and leased fee interests was introduced in Chapter 5. However, it is important to review and expand upon that discussion here. As noted earlier, the leased fee interest belongs to the lessor. The leasehold interest belongs to the lessee. Let's look at an illustration and the important points that should be noted. When contract rent is less than market rent, an advantage to the lessee occurs and creates a positive leasehold. Those were in bold. This is highlighted, so remember this. When contract rent is more than market rent, an advantage to the lessor occurs and creates a negative leasehold. So when you're charging more rent than the market is in your area, it's beneficial to the owner, and it creates the negative leasehold. So I guess it's kind of like a negative for the renter, negative leasehold. The leasehold interest is defined by the amount of rent that is less than market rent. The amount of difference between the contract and market rent. That's the leasehold interest. The difference between the contract and market rent. The leased fee interest is defined by the amount of contract rent over and above market rent. So pretty much it's the amount of money in between what you are charging your tenant above market rent. So let's say market rent is $500 a month and you're charging $600 a month. Then the lease fee interest would be $100. The leasehold interest is the backwards of that. So it's the amount of rent that is less than market rent, the contract rent. So the same principle applies. If the market rent is $500 a month and you're only charging your tenant contract rent at $400 a month, then the leasehold interest is $100. Positive leasehold occurs when the lessee is paying less than market rent. Negative leasehold is when the lessee is paying rent higher than the market level. Page 205. It shows a diagram. On the left is talking about contract rent. Above that, it shows leasehold interest. And above that is the line of market rent. Underneath that, it says positive leasehold contract rent below market rent. Oh, okay. So it's talking about this is the leasehold interest. The money, the difference that's left in between the market rent and contract rent. So the same thing applies. For instance, let's say market rent is the $500 line. That's what the average, people are paying in rent in that area, that neighborhood. The leased fee interest is the $100 in between what you are charging your tenant that you're like the owner's getting to pocket or whatever. And then contract rent is below market rent, and the leasehold interest is the $100 that's like more beneficial to the renter. It says positive leasehold contract rent is below market rent and negative leasehold contract rent above market rent. It should be obvious from the above illustration that in order to develop an opinion of value of the leasehold or leased fee interest, the fee simple interest must be valued as if the investment property were freely available to be leased at market level, as must the leased fee estate, based on what the property is generating per the terms of the lease. All right, we got some key terms. So remember, appurtenant rights. Rights that go with the ownership of real property. They are usually transferred with the property, but may be sold separately. This is a legal term referring to both physical and non-physical appurtenances. Dominant tenement. A property that benefits from an easement. Easement. A right to use some part of another person's real property for a particular purpose. An easement is irrevocable and creates an interest in the property. Easement appurtenant. An easement that burdens one piece of the land for the benefit of another. Easement in gross. An easement that benefits a person instead of a particular property. There is a dominant tenant, but no dominant tenement. Leased fee interest, defined by the amount of contract rent over and above market rent. Leasehold interest, defined by the amount of rent that is less than market rent. Amount of difference between contract and market rent. Life estate. A freehold estate that lasts only as long as a specified person lives. Life tenant. Someone who owns a life estate, the person entitled to possession of the property during the measuring life. Negative leasehold. When contract rent is more than market rent, an advantage to the lessor. Positive leasehold. When contract rent is less than market rent, an advantage to the lessee. Remainder man. The party in a life estate who is entitled to the remainder of the property interest after the life estate is terminated. Servient tenement. A property that is burdened by an easement. Timeshares. Grant the right to use or possess a property for a specified period of time. The right may or may not be accompanied with an ownership interest in the property. Extra note, think of easements as utilities.